Hey everybody, it's Jesse here at Fantasy Customs. Today we got this truck, and this one has a dead miss at idle and going and some loud noise. Definitely misfiring. So I'm sitting here editing this Chevy lifter camshaft video, and I want to apologize in advance to everybody watching this because there are a few parts where the camera shuts off and I don't realize I either ran out of batteries or ran out of memory. So anyways, I want to apologize about that. This is kind of a how-to video. It doesn't have every single detail in there because I was trying to get the job done. It does have a lot of the good points in there of the harder, more tricky parts to do in it, and it shows a couple of the special tools. Hey, so I apologize, I lost some footage. I didn't notice until I was done with the repair. But to remove this manifold, what you're looking at is undoing all of the 4 plugs on each side to the injectors and getting that harness out of the way, and then you can move this piece of the harness out of the way like I have in the previous video. And okay, so to remove this manifold, there's 5 8mm bolts on each side of it. On this side straight back, and on this side straight back. Remove all of those. So I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into these fuel line disconnect things. This is actually the special tool, but really what I did in the past, I didn't even know I actually had these. I've never used them. All I do is cut a plastic bottle cap, and all I really need is the part that sticks up. And so you have a little slit in only one side. This has it in both sides here, but I have a slit in one side, and then the proper length I need, and then the only thing that you have to make sure is that you cut it off so that the circumference is only big enough to basically touch each other when the thing wraps around the fuel line. And then you push it in there, it releases the prongs, and boom, you're off. So give you a better look. Now it's the same as far as we're looking at an 01, and it was the exact same on the 2010 that we did. And so that's all you're doing, is using the plastic to depress those 4 little tabs so that they can clear this little thing right here, that little piece on the hard metal fuel line that's a little bit fatter. And so that's it, and it's pretty simple. If you don't have this tool, which that's the first time I've ever used the tool. The tool works great, they're cheap, but if you don't have it, like I said, I used a plastic bottle cap that I cut up many times, and it worked perfectly. Maybe not quite as sweet as this thing works, but it worked really good. So okay, after you're this far, I'm going to go ahead and remove all of the rocker arms. There's 8 of them on each side. I don't know if I'm getting into that head yet, but either way, you want to keep the rocker arm with the push rod that's underneath here. You're going to pull both of those out, and I'm going to go ahead and use some painter's tape to keep them together, and permanent marker to label them. I'm just going to label them 1 through 8.
on the tape, and tape the rocker arm with the push rod that's under here, each one of them, and put them in a box, because when it goes back together you definitely want to make sure that you're putting the same rocker arm on the same valve and the same push rod on the same rocker valve, if that makes rocker arm, sorry, if that makes any sense. So I'm going to go ahead and remove all those. After I'm done with that, then I can finally remove this cylinder head and get a good look down in there at all of my lifters. Alright, here we go. Okay, at this point, after all this stuff's removed, rocker arms, the push rods, and then I don't know what the plate, the base plate that all the rocker arms sit on is called, but that piece too is out. Then you can go ahead and start untorquing the heads. And so the tightening sequence in my eyes should be the same as the loosening sequence in reverse order. So you'll start by loosening number 15, 14, and so on and so forth. I hope that you can read this sequence here. Go ahead and untorque these and take a look. Unfortunately, I'm running out of daylight here today, but now you can see the head is pulled. Those are the lifter trays, so there's one 10mm bolt holding each lifter tray. You can pull that bolt and pull the whole lifter trays out. So on these ones you got to make sure that you know where they go. You can always figure it out again, but you want to keep the respecting lifter with the respecting push rod hole there, because those are gonna have wear on them that's unique to the cam and all that stuff. Anyways, so yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and pull this out. On a newer truck like this that has the AFM, you're gonna have, I think on 1, 3, 5, and 7, those cylinders are gonna have the different style lifters that are the cylinder deactivation lifters. So yeah, you'll be able to tell the difference of those. On this one I've got a misfire on cylinder number 8 there, which is the very back cylinder there. I'm going to go ahead and pull that out and look inside there and see what the cam looks like. That's my whole purpose of doing all this. So I'm also going to take that coolant out of those cylinders. I don't want that sitting in there. And yeah, so here I go. Try and get a video though of the camshaft. I'm pretty sure the camshaft's ruined as well, so gonna need a camshaft. I'm sorry you couldn't see that lifter, it was all pitted and messed up, but anyway, so now you can see that I'm taking the radiator fan off. It's just a couple of bolts, 10mm, and undo the hoses from it, and you should be able to unplug the electrical connections on it and pull it right out. After that, I'm draining some coolant out of the radiator and undoing, next you'll see I'm undoing these lines out of it. So there's little teeny clip rings holding those hoses onto the radiator. Undo those clip rings and pull all the hoses, and then you can easily unbolt the radiator and get it out of there. So with the radiator out of the way, now you have a little bit of extra room, and that way when we get all these front accessories off here, then we'll have enough room to slide the new camshaft in there. So that's why you got to take the radiator out. Anyways, so yeah, we're done with that. Now it's time to tackle these front accessories. We'll start by removing the belt, and then we'll start at the top and work our way down. Alright, let's start taking off the belt and the accessories. Here we go! Here we go again! Okay, at this point you can see that
I have a crescent wrench and I put it on the belt tensioner to remove tension from the belt to get it off, and then remove the 2 bolts holding the alternator on next. Make sure it's already unplugged probably, but if it isn't, unplug the connector from it and you'll have a wire 10mm nut on it. Remove that, and I put the bolts back in the bracket just so I don't lose them. Next, power steering pump. I had a impactor and I think there's 3 bolts. I left the lines hooked up to it. I just moved it over to the side. Now I'm working on the water pump. I think there's 6 bolts holding it on. So at this point, I'm missing a little bit of footage here. And so what you'll be looking at is the nut that's on the harmonic balancer. You're gonna turn the harmonic balancer around and use your hand to work the ribs of the belt off of the AC pulley, and just by putting enough pressure on it and working it, you'll get it off. One rib of the ribbed belt at a time until it's off, and it's just a really tight fitting belt, but that's how you get that off. So sorry that we missed that. There's other videos on YouTube that show that. I don't have a video of that, unfortunately. Ran out of video on the memory card, so we've got a harmonic balancer puller. This is the Chrysler Dodge one that you can rent from AutoZone for 75 bucks. The bolt is still in there but loose, so it's going to come back a little bit and then I'm going to unloosen it some more, but I want it in there as far as I can to start pulling on it, because I want the most threads on it as possible. So anyways, you guys, the second time pulling on it, what a nightmare. What's actually happening here? Oh, it's bottomed out into the thing. We need the bolt looser again for like the millionth friggin' time. Okay, so the bolt ended up you know, threading in like I was showing you. So I've got a big socket, and inside the socket's a short bolt with a big washer on it, so that this bolt on the harmonic balancer doesn't ruin the socket and like go into where the 1/2 inch socket or ratchet attaches to the socket. So anyways, get that all centered up reasonably and put her on there. And cross your fingers. It appears that it's pulling it a little sideways, which is weird, because it should be 100% centered. Barely sideways, not too worried about it.
Yeah, that doesn't look right to me. Oh, it worked. I don't know why, it's been a while since I've done this, and it looks sketchy. But let me show you, whoa, how I just hillbillied all this. Shoot, we lost the bolt. Yeah. Let me find that bolt so I can show you what I just did. Okay, so this is how we did this. You do not want to screw up the threads on the crank, which are way in there, and there is a little tapered surface on the edge. So you can get away with quite a bit, but either way you can see that offset spot. That is where I was sitting with this socket, which obviously you could use a little bit bigger socket, but either way, that, and this is the Dodge Chrysler 3, the harmonic balancer puller, and it basically goes like that, and you tighten up onto this bolt in there and the bolts in there, just so that I wouldn't ruin the socket, because you know, it's like it's a pretty close, you know, it might mess up the socket a teeny bit. If you don't care about the socket, then probably don't worry too much about that, except also if it got, you know, it could get stuck in there, number one, and then you'll probably ruin the threads on that, number two, and number three, this bolt's only so long, so you really actually need just about all of that right there to get this thing fully off of there. You could see how far it came out. It comes out quite a ways before it's finally off of there. So that is how I pulled it. And so you could use the same method pretty easily. This is a 23mm socket. You could use probably a 24, 25 would be more perfect. But anyways, that's how I pulled the harmonic balancer. They also say to reuse these, or I'm sorry, to replace these, but I know for a fact that most dealerships, when they do work, they do not replace these. But supposedly this is an aluminum bolt, and it is really light. You can tell that it's aluminum, and it stretches, I guess. Which, yeah, just looking at the threads, it almost looks like it really does stretch a little bit. But they say just go ahead and put some red Loctite on there, and that lots of people get away with. Okay, we're back in the shop again today after removing the harmonic balancer. So now we're pretty much there to pull those electrical wires off the front timing cover, and we can go ahead and pull the timing cover off of there. Looks like, how many bolts are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. About, I see 8 maybe. 8 bolts on the timing cover, and then I don't know if there's a couple bolts underneath coming up into there from the oil pan, but I guess I'll find out. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull those. Okay, so at this point you can see that I'm removing the couple of bolts on the front of that cover. I think there's 10, and it should pop off without too much trouble. There are 2 bolts underneath, and you got to move the little plastic wiring piece out of the way a little bit to get them out. It's really not that big a deal.
Now at this point, I'm lining up the dots on the crankshaft and the camshaft pulleys. Once you get the dots perfectly aligned, taking off the other half of these coils, if you haven't already done it, getting them out of the way, pulling the valve cover off. After that, a couple bolts on the valve cover, and that's out of there. And now I can get in there to pull loose all of these rocker arms and push rods. I get those all the way out of the way. And now that I think about it, actually, I didn't need to line up those sprockets yet, because after all the push rods are out, which you see me pulling them all out here, I'm keeping track of these, by the way. All of them need to go right back in the same spot, both the lifters, push rods, bolts, everything. Once they're all out, now I turn the motor over a couple of times. The camshaft will push all of the lifters up into their little buckets where they'll be held in place. Pull the timing gears off and pull the old camshaft out, and then you'll still have time to put the new camshaft in without your lifters falling down into the engine. Sorry about that. I ran out of freaking battery again. All you have to do, pull this bolt out, pull the gear off the end, make sure that this mark is lined up with the mark on the crankshaft. Usually it's a dot. And then there's three of these little guys, or four of those, holding this plate on like that. And then you can start rotating the camshaft on out. Sorry, I missed that. You'll see it going back together and it'll make sense. Anyways, keep pulling this out. That's the whole problem right there. Look at that. That's the guy. That's the whole darn problem. Alright. Goob it up with assembly lube. Don't need to be shy with this stuff. Get it on there. Okay, you can see I am getting the sprocket back on the chain, and I'm going to get it all lined up with the crankshaft dot. Both of the dots need to be pointing at each other, and after that I'll start threading the bolt into the camshaft. And the tricky part about this is there is a little dowel pin, or it's just really a pin, it's not a dowel, but there is a pin on the camshaft, and that pin has to go into the locating hole so that it's basically the timing hole of the camshaft sprocket. So that sprocket can only go on there one way. You can't have it on there any other way. So you have to get that pin in the hole. Basically, you'll be able to tell that the pin is in the hole once it doesn't move back and forth anymore. Like, you see how it moves back and forth right there? That means it's not in the hole yet. So basically what I do is I get it just barely so that it's just right where it will be tight, and then I start rotating the crankshaft around, you'll see here. And by rotating the crankshaft around, I can keep pushing it in and out, in and out, in and out until I find the pinhole. And once I've found the pinhole, then you'll see it tighten all the way up then. So it is a little bit complicated, but you'll be able to see it right here. Talking about there's a hole in your cam sprocket that's got them made up in there, so you're gonna have to, make sure you have the timing on the sprockets correct for the crank sprocket and the cam sprocket with the two lined up, and then you can start spinning. You can put the balancer bolt, harmonic balancer bolt back in there and start spinning it over till you find where that pin is, and then once you tighten it up, once you tighten your cam bolt up, you will then know that it's for sure good, because if it's not, you'll be able to move it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So anyways, once you've got that torqued down, you can go ahead and we're going to put the cover back on. You want everything to be really clean, obviously. Cleaned up the cylinder head and the block, and got all your lifters back in there. It was a good chance to clean, soak your lifters, whatever, blow them out with compressed air. You can also clean the tops of your pistons, get all the carbon off of them if you care to, and get it as clean as you can until you're happy with it. The cleaner the better. Okay, so obviously I missed putting the timing cover back on, but that's pretty straightforward. And then if you want to pause that right there, that shows you the sequence. And be careful though, there are, if you read that, there are different torque settings, and I have them written there, but they're kind of hard to read. Let's see if I can pause it and read that real quick for you. Oops. Shoot. Having trouble pausing it to read it. So what I did is not what the manual says, so do this at your own risk. It worked for me, but technically they actually have a degree that they're supposed to go. But what I did was I did the M12 bolts at 25 foot-pounds, 50 foot-pounds, and then 68 foot-pounds in that order. Each one a different stage, following the pattern. And then I did all the M8s, which are the smaller ones, at obviously smaller ones, at 18 foot-pounds. And also put red Loctite and try and get that harmonic balancer. I see it says 74 foot-pounds and then 105 degrees, so whatever you want to do for that, just put red Loctite on it. So at this point I realized the footage was corrupt, and this is where I'm talking about the harmonic balancer. What I did was I got a longer bolt that threaded in there, and you need that so that you don't ruin the threads on the crankshaft. With the stock bolt you'll only be able to get just a couple of threads, and it takes so much force that you can ruin the ends of the threads on the crankshaft. So use a longer bolt. If the bolt's too long, try and use some spacers to get the right amount of threads in there to be able to pull it in a little bit, and take away spacers as you need to till you can get the regular stock bolt in there, and then red thread lock it or replace it. Okay, so at this point I'm putting the rocker plate back on there, or whatever you want to call that thing, the support plate. But I have already put on the harmonic balancer, which I showed, and then I had put on the AC pulley, and it goes on the same way it comes off. You put it over the crankshaft first, and then you work it rib by rib while you turn the crankshaft over. You work it the belt over the AC pulley until it's on there. Once you get all of the rockers and push rods in the respecting holes, I go ahead and then start. You can either do it by the sequence, the way the manual has you do it, or you can just watch them carefully and know when it's on bottom of the lobe so that you can tighten your rocker arms up. And once they're all tightened down, I can't remember what the foot-pounds was for that. If I can find it out again, I'll put it in the description. I'll try and put some of the torque settings in the description for you guys as a quick reference to look back, so that you don't have to. You could just look in the description for the torque settings. That would be real nice for you guys, so I'll try and remember to do that. But anyways, there you can see I'm cranking the crankshaft over and over and over so that I can get these rocker arms tightened down on their push rods, and they need to be on the bottom of the lowest point of the lobe, so that way you're not pushing open on the valves. So yeah, now at this point you're gonna go ahead and get the exhaust manifold put back on, bolted back up. If you need a new gasket, get a new gasket. My gasket was okay, so I reused it. As soon as you have that all bolted up, basically I missed showing it go back together, but you're gonna have to go back and I put the water pump on first after the AC belt's on, and then I put the power steering pump back together, and then the alternator goes back on, and then I'm gonna go ahead and put the radiator back in and the radiator fan, and hook up the hoses, the power steering hoses and the transmission cooling hoses into the radiator. And then I'm gonna go ahead and then hook all the wires up, all your plug wires and everything, and then do your last two things, which just put the intake back on and hook the battery back up.
Okay, the truck's done. Give it a start. So yeah, as you can see, no flashing engine light. Everything's good. I put a lot of miles on it now, so I know it's good. No bad noises, although the belt is squealing a little bit. I don't know why the belt's squealing like that. It's not really squealing that loud, but it's just noisy. Anyways, everything's good and ready to go. The thing's running perfect, and that was a job well done. So she's ready to be driven. Good oil pressure, everything's fine. So I'm happy with the job, and hopefully that helps fill some people in on what the process is to go ahead and put a camshaft in one of these LS motors, and specifically on these AFM ones if you're monkeying around with that. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will catch you on the next project here shortly. Alright, take care, bye.